Have you ever been pushed so far down that you thought the bottom was your permanent home? Penelope was the brilliant mind behind $1 billion skyline, yet her boss treated her like garbage simply because she didn't fit into a size 2 dress. But everything changed on a rainy Tuesday. A spilled tray of scalding macchiatos, a ruined $5,000 suit, and an accidental collision with the city's most feared underground kingpin turned her living nightmare into a brutal, satisfying vengeance. Listen closely. Penelope Moore was used to taking up space, but at Caldwell Design Group, she spent every waking second trying to make herself invisible. At 240 pounds, Penelope was a soft, curvy woman in an office built of sharp angles, glass walls, and razor-thin egos. She was the firm's senior architectural designer in everything but title and paycheck, while the other women in the office, sleek, size 0 junior assistants like Chloe Jenkins, wore designer pencil skirts and spent their afternoons flirting with the partners. Penelope sat hunched in the windowless back corner. Her desk was a fortress of discarded blueprints, empty takeout containers, and half-finished renderings. She was the secret engine keeping the firm alive, but to her boss, Harrison Caldwell, she was nothing more than a convenient punching bag. Harrison was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a corporate laboratory. He had slicked back blonde hair, wore bespoke navy suits, and possessed the kind of aggressive, entitled narcissism that only generational wealth could buy. He was a terrible architect, but a brilliant thief. For the past 3 years, he had systematically taken Penelope's groundbreaking designs, slapped his signature on the bottom right corner, and presented them to the city's elite as his own. It was a gloomy Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the firm's lavish conference room. Inside, Harrison was wrapping up a presentation for the Lakeside Zenith, a massive, multi-million-dollar commercial complex. Penelope stood near the heavy oak doors, clutching a stack of backup files to her chest, trying to blend into the shadows. "And as you can see," Harrison said smoothly, gesturing to the glowing 3D rendering on the screen, "my vision for the Zenith incorporates sustainable airflow and natural light, maximizing both aesthetic appeal and energy efficiency." The investors nodded approvingly. Penelope bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Her vision. She had stayed at the office until 3 a.m. for 3 straight weeks, perfecting that airflow matrix. She had calculated the load-bearing requirements for the cantilevered glass balconies, while Harrison was out taking long, boozy lunches. After the investors left full of praise and handshakes, the temperature in the room plummeted. The moment the frosted glass doors clicked shut, Harrison's charming smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of utter contempt. "Penelope," he snapped, loosening his silk tie. "What on earth are you wearing?" Penelope looked down at her sensible black slacks and the oversized charcoal cardigan she wore to hide her figure. It's just my work clothes, Mr. Caldwell." Chloe Jenkins snickered from the corner, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against her iPad. "It looks like a circus tent. Penny, seriously, do you not own a mirror, or did you eat that too?" Penelope flushed her cheeks, burning with hot, familiar shame. She stared at her orthopedic shoes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just bringing the backup files in case the investors asked about the structural. I didn't ask you to speak," Harrison interrupted, stepping into her personal space. He looked her up and down with undisguised disgust. "You are an eyesore, Penelope, a walking, breathing liability to this firm's image. If you weren't mildly competent at CAD software, I would have fired you a year ago. Do you think men with billions of dollars want to hand their money over to a firm represented by a fat, sloppy mess?" "Harrison, I designed the entire Zenith project," Penelope said, a rare spark of defiance flaring in her chest. "Every single line of it." Harrison's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. You designed nothing. You executed my ideas. You are a human printer, Penelope. And right now, the printer is out of line." He turned away, dismissing her entirely. "Go get the office coffee, and don't mess it up like last time. Chloe wants oat milk, not almond. If you can't even get an order right, maybe we need to find someone who can." "It's pouring rain," Penelope pointed out, her voice trembling. "And I have the deadline for the structural revisions." Did I stutter? Harrison roared, the sudden volume making Penelope flinch. "Get the coffee, now, and take the stairs down. God knows you could use the cardio." Chloe laughed out loud. Penelope swallowed the massive lump in her throat, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She nodded silently, turned on her heel, and walked out of the conference room. She didn't take the stairs. She took the elevator, leaning against the cool metal wall as the car descended, 40 floors, silently praying for the day the earth would just open up and swallow her whole. The rain in Chicago that day wasn't just falling, it was attacking. It blew sideways, stinging Penelope's face like tiny needles as she trudged 3 blocks to the artisanal coffee shop Harrison demanded they use. She didn't have an umbrella. Chloe had borrowed hers last week and never returned it. By the time she reached the cafe, her hair was plastered to her face, and her cardigan was soaked through, hanging off her heavy frame like a soggy, wet blanket. She placed the massive order: 4 extra-large lattes, 3 iced matchas, 2 double espressos, and Chloe's ridiculously complicated half-calf oat milk vanilla macchiato. She paid with the company card, waiting shivering near the counter. When the barista handed her the 2 large cardboard trays, they felt ridiculously precarious. 11 hot and cold drinks brimming to the lids, balanced on flimsy recycled cardboard. Penelope tucked her leather portfolio containing her original sketches for a new casino project she had been working on in secret tightly under her arm, and began the agonizing trek back to the office. The wind fought her every step of the way. Her arms ached, her wet clothes chafed, and her heart pounded with a mix of physical exertion and deep, soul-crushing anxiety. "If I spill these, he's going to fire me," she thought in a panic. "If he fires me, I can't pay my mother's medical bills. I'll lose the apartment." She finally made it back to the towering glass and steel lobby of the Caldwell building. She nudged the heavy revolving door with her hip, struggling to keep the drink trays level. The lobby was expansive, with slick marble floors that were currently slick with rain, tracked in by hundreds of corporate drones. Penelope was so focused on keeping her footing and balancing the coffees that she completely failed to see the wall of a man stepping out of the VIP executive elevator. He was walking fast, flanked by 2 massive men in dark suits, reading a document on his phone. Penelope took a step forward. Her wet rubber sole caught the edge of the marble inlay. Her ankle gave way. "Oh, God, no!" she gasped. She lunged forward to overcorrect, but momentum was a cruel mistress. The 2 cardboard trays buckled. 11 cups of scalding coffee, sticky matcha and iced milk launched into the air like a sugary, caffeinated firework display. And they landed directly on the chest of the man stepping into her path. Smack. The sound of bursting plastic lids echoed through the vast lobby. Penelope hit the marble floor hard on her knees, the breath knocked out of her lungs. Her leather portfolio spilled open, scattering her hand-drawn blueprints across the wet floor. Silence descended on the lobby. Penelope scrambled to her knees, gasping in horror. She looked up. Standing above her was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and expensive whiskey. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad, imposing shoulders, draped in a bespoke charcoal wool suit that was now completely drenched in brown sludge. Foam dripped from the lapel of his tailored jacket. A stray ice cube slid down his crisp white dress shirt. He had dark, piercing eyes, sharp cheekbones, and a jawline covered in dark scruff. And right now those eyes were staring down at the mess on his chest with an unreadable expression. "I am so sorry," Penelope shrieked, panic clawing up her throat. She frantically grabbed napkins from her pockets, reaching up in a blind panic and dabbing at his ruined suit. "Oh my God! I am so sorry. I slipped. The floor was wet. My boss is going to kill me. I am so incredibly sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I'll buy you a new suit. Please, I'm so sorry." The two massive men flanking the stranger immediately stepped forward, their hands slipping inside their jackets, their faces twisted in anger. "Boss," one of them growled, a man with a thick scar across his cheek. "Step back. I'll handle this clumsy—" "Matteo!" "Stop!" the wet man commanded. His voice was low, incredibly smooth, and resonated with a quiet authority that instantly froze the bodyguard in his tracks. The man, Dominic Russo, looked down at the trembling, soaking wet woman at his feet. In his world, people didn't bump into him. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. As the head of the Russo syndicate controlling the city's shipping ports, real estate developments, and underground casinos, Dominic was a ghost story told in corporate boardrooms and back alleys alike. He was utterly ruthless, cold, and calculated. But as he looked at Penelope, he didn't see an assassin or an insult. He saw genuine, raw terror. She was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her plump, rain-streaked cheeks, desperately trying to wipe espresso out of his $5,000 Brioni suit with a crumpled Starbucks napkin. But she wasn't looking at him. She kept glancing up at the elevator bank, whispering, "He's going to fire me. Harrison is going to fire me. I'm dead. I'm ruined." Dominic gently reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand around Penelope's wrist, stopping her frantic wiping. The contact made her gasp and finally look up into his eyes. "Breathe," Dominic said softly. Penelope blinked, a teardrop falling from her eyelashes. "Your suit, it's ruined." "It's wool. It will survive," Dominic said dismissively. He let go of her wrist and crouched down gracefully, his knees popping slightly. To the absolute shock of his bodyguards, Dominic Russo began picking up the wet, scattered blueprints from the marble floor. He paused, his dark eyes scanning the top sketch. It was the casino design, the very same casino project his legitimate front company, Russo Real Estate, had just put out a blind bid for. The design on the paper was staggering innovative, brilliant, utilizing structural curves he hadn't thought possible. "You drew this?" Dominic asked, his voice tightening with sudden interest. Penelope aggressively wiped her nose with the back of her hand, nodding nervously. Yes. It's just a side project. Please, sir, I really have to get back upstairs. If I go back, without the coffee, my boss—" She choked on a sob, the sheer exhaustion and humiliation of her life finally breaking her. "I'm so sorry." She snatched the wet papers from his hands, shoving them into her ruined portfolio. She couldn't even look him in the eye as she pushed herself off the ground, her wet clothes clinging to her, heavily feeling more grotesque and clumsy than ever before. She turned and practically ran towards the elevators, leaving a puddle of coffee and a stunned Mafia boss in her wake. Dominic slowly stood up, holding a single torn corner of a blueprint that she had left behind. In the bottom corner it read, "Caldwell Design Group. Lead architect, Penelope Moore." "Matteo," Dominic said, his eyes never leaving the elevator doors as they closed behind her. "Yeah, boss?" Matteo asked, handing him a clean handkerchief. "Cancel my lunch meeting with the mayor," Dominic ordered, wiping the foam from his lapel. "We are going upstairs to pay a visit to Caldwell Design Group. It seems they have something that belongs to me." The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like a funeral march. Penelope stared at her reflection in the polished brass doors. She looked like a drowned rat. Her hair was a tangled, frizzy mess, her clothes were stained with coffee, and floor grime, and she was entirely empty-handed. This is it, she thought, her chest tight. He's going to fire me. The doors dinged open, and she stepped onto the plush grey carpet of the Caldwell Design Group. The office was an open-concept nightmare, meaning everyone could see everything. As Penelope walked down the main aisle toward the conference room, the murmurs began. Heads popped over sleek white monitors. Keyboards stopped clicking. Chloe Jenkins was the first to spot her. She let out an exaggerated gasp, covering her mouth to hide a malicious smile. Oh my God. Look at what the cat dragged in. Did you fall in a dumpster? Penny? Harrison stepped out of his glass-walled office, a mug in his hand. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at Penelope. His face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, a deep, ugly red rage. Penelope, Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet, carrying across the silent office. Where is the coffee? Penelope stopped in the middle of the floor, clutching her wet portfolio. Her whole body shook. I had an accident in the lobby. I slipped. The floor was wet from the rain and I dropped the trays. Harrison took a slow, deliberate step forward. You dropped them. I tripped. Penelope whispered, tears welling up again. I'm sorry. I'll go back out. Let me just get my purse. I'll pay for it myself. And go back. You'll go back. Harrison suddenly exploded, slamming his mug down on Chloe's desk. The ceramic shattered, making several employees jump. Do you have any idea how incompetent you are? A simple task, one simple mindless task that a trained monkey could do, and you fail at it. But of course you did. Look at you. Harrison stepped right up to her, invading her space, waving his hand at her body. You can't even carry a few cups of coffee without your own bulk getting in the way. You are a clumsy, pathetic fat joke, Penelope. I have kept you here out of pity for a miserable, lonely woman who has absolutely nothing going for her except a mediocre ability to draw lines on a computer. Penelope sobbed, stepping back, wrapping her arms around herself. That's not true. I designed the Zenith. You know I did. Shut your mouth, Harrison screamed, pointing a finger directly in her face. You are nothing. You are a parasite. You think anyone will ever hire you. Look at yourself. You're disgusting. You're fired, Penelope. Pack your trash into a box and get out of my sight. And don't even think about asking for severance or a recommendation. I will make sure you never work in this city again. The entire office watched in stunned, morbid silence. Chloe was openly smirking. Penelope stood, frozen, her heart shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He was right. Who would hire her? She was nothing. Ding. The soft chime of the private VIP elevator echoed through the tense, silent office. Harrison whipped his head around, annoyed by the interruption. Nobody used the VIP elevator except the building's owner and top-tier clients. The heavy silver doors slid open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Out stepped 3 men. The 2 on the outside were massive, built like freight trains, their hands resting ominously inside their dark, tailored jackets. But it was the man in the center who pulled all the air out of the room. Dominic Russo stepped onto the grey carpet. He was no longer covered in coffee. He had stripped off his ruined jacket and tie, leaving him in a crisp white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing flashes of dark, intricate tattoos. His face was a mask of cold, lethal calm. He didn't look like a corporate client. He looked like an apex predator that had just wandered into a petting zoo. Harrison's anger instantly evaporated, replaced by the slick, ingratiating smile of a salesman. He didn't recognize Dominic's face, but he recognized power, wealth, and danger when he saw it. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Harrison said. quickly, smoothing his hair and stepping away from Penelope. "Can I help you? I am Harrison Caldwell, the CEO of this firm. We weren't expecting any walk-ins today, but—" "Are you the man who was just screaming?" Dominic asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a straight razor. Harrison chuckled nervously. "Oh, that. I apologize for the disruption. You just witnessed a rather unfortunate termination. Sometimes you have to trim the dead weight from a company to maintain excellence. You know, now if you're looking for architectural representation—" Dominic didn't look at Harrison. His dark eyes bypassed the CEO entirely and landed on Penelope, who was standing, frozen, her mouth slightly parted in shock. She recognized the man from the lobby, the man she had spilled coffee on. Oh God, she thought. He came upstairs to sue me. He came to make sure I pay for his suit. Dominic began walking toward them, his leather shoes silent on the carpet. His bodyguards fanned out Matteo, stepping casually in front of the main exit doors, locking them with a loud, definitive click. A wave of unease rippled through the employees. Chloe shrank back into her chair. "Trim the deadweight," Dominic repeated softly, finally stopping a few feet away from Harrison. He looked down at the shorter man with an expression of profound disgust. Interesting choice of words. "Well, yes," Harrison stammered, suddenly sweating. The aura coming off this stranger was suffocating. "She's incredibly incompetent. As I said, I'm Harrison Caldwell. And you are—" "My name is Dominic Russo," he said smoothly. Name dropped into the room like a live grenade. Someone in the back of the office literally gasped. Harrison's smug face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. His knees visibly buckled. Every businessman in Chicago knew who the Russos were. They owned half the concrete in the city and controlled the labor unions. To cross a Russo was to sign your own death warrant. And Dominic was the head of the snake. "More, Mr. Russo." Harrison stuttered, his voice cracking violently. I had no idea. It is an absolute honor. We submitted a blind bid for your new casino project. I didn't expect you to come in person. Please come into my office. Let me get you a drink." "I don't want a drink," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, "and I don't want to step foot in your office." Dominic slowly turned away from the trembling CEO and looked at Penelope. The cold, lethal hardness in his eyes melted away, instantly replaced by something entirely different. Respect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the torn corner of the blueprint he had picked up in the lobby. He held it out to her. "Ms. Moore," Dominic said gently, ensuring the entire office heard him. "You dropped this in the lobby." Penelope stared at the paper, then up at the terrifying Mafia boss, her mind entirely blank. "You picked it up." "I did," Dominic said. He turned his head slowly back to Harrison, the lethal glare returning in full force. "Mr. Caldwell, you submitted a bid to my company for a $70 million casino contract. You claimed you were the lead architect." Harrison swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his temples. Yes, I am." Dominic took a single step toward Harrison. The sheer physical intimidation made the CEO stumble backward until his spine hit a cubicle wall. "You're a liar!" Dominic hissed, his voice vibrating with menace. "I saw the original drafts 5 minutes ago, scattered across the marble floor of the lobby. They belong to Penelope Moore. She is the genius behind this design. You are nothing but a parasite, stealing a brilliant woman's work." Harrison raised his hands defensively. "Mr. Russo, please, you don't understand. She works for me. Therefore, her intellectual property is—" "Shut up!" Dominic commanded. The silence in the room was absolute. Dominic looked at Harrison's immaculate suit, then back at Penelope's tear-stained face and soaking wet clothes. The math wasn't hard to do. "Matteo," Dominic called out, without looking away from Harrison. "Boss," Matteo answered from the door. "Mr. Caldwell here was just explaining how to handle incompetence." Dominic said, a cruel, terrifying smile touching the corners of his mouth. "I think he needs a practical demonstration on respect. Make him apologize to the lady. Properly." Matteo didn't sprint. He didn't even rush. He walked across the open concept floor of Caldwell Design Group with the casual, terrifying stroll of a man who broke bones for a living. The employees parted for him, like the Red Sea, pressing themselves against filing cabinets and frosted glass partitions, desperate to avoid his gaze. Harrison pressed his back flat against the cubicle wall, his impeccably styled blonde hair now clinging to his sweaty forehead. "Now, wait just a minute," Harrison stammered, raising his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. "Mr. Russo, we are businessmen. There is no need for this. I can offer you a discount on the retainer. We can co-credit Ms. More on the blueprints." Matteo stopped directly in front of the CEO. Without a single word, he reached out and clamped his massive, calloused hand over Harrison's silk tie, twisting it sharply. He yanked Harrison forward, dragging him away from the wall and throwing him roughly to the center of the floor, right at Penelope's soaking, wet feet. Before Harrison could scramble up, Matteo drove the heavy heel of his Italian leather shoe firmly into the back of Harrison's calves. With a sharp, undignified yelp, Harrison Caldwell's knees slammed into the hard floor. "Stay down!" Matteo rumbled his voice like grinding stones. He placed a heavy hand firmly on Harrison's shoulder, pinning him in a kneeling position. Penelope gasped, taking a half step back. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man who had tormented her for 3 years, who had ridiculed her weight, stolen her life's work, and held her mother's medical care over her head, like an executioner's axe, was now kneeling at her feet, trembling like a frightened child. Dominic slowly walked over, coming to stand beside Penelope. He didn't look at Harrison. He looked down at Penelope, his expression remarkably gentle for a man with so much blood on his hands. "Look at him, Penelope," Dominic instructed quietly. "Take a good look at the man who told you that you were nothing. Does he look like a god to you? Or does he look like a coward who built his entire empire on the back of a brilliant woman? He was too weak to respect." Penelope looked down. Harrison's face was red with humiliation and stark terror. He was shaking his breath, coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "Apologize to her," Dominic commanded, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the office. Harrison looked up, his eyes darting wildly to his employees, who were watching his utter destruction with wide, unblinking eyes. Chloe Jenkins, the woman who had laughed at Penelope just 10 minutes ago, was practically hiding under her desk, her face drained of color. I can't," Harrison whispered, his pride making one final pathetic stand. "I'm the CEO. I can't kneel in front of my own staff." Dominic sighed, a slow, dangerous sound. He casually unbuttoned his cuffs. "Matteo, break his fingers. One by one. Start with the right hand. He's going to need to learn how to sign away his company with his left." Wait, God, please, no!" Harrison shrieked as Matteo shifted his grip. The CEO looked up at Penelope, tears of pure panic spilling over his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Penelope." "For what?" Dominic asked coldly. "Be specific, Mr. Caldwell." For yelling at you," Harrison sobbed, staring at her shoes. "And," Dominic prompted, "for taking the Zenith project." Harrison confessed, his voice cracking. "I stole it. I took your blueprints and put my name on them. I stole the Lakeside Zenith. I stole the Michigan Avenue high-rise, and I took credit for the casino bid." It was all you. It was always you. A collective gasp swept through the office. Several junior architects exchanged furious glances. Harrison had just confessed to massive corporate fraud in front of 50 witnesses. And what else? Dominic pushed his dark eyes narrowing. Tell her what she is. Harrison squeezed his eyes shut, defeated. You're a genius, Penelope. You are the only reason this firm hasn't gone bankrupt. I only insulted your appearance because I was terrified you'd realize how much better you are than me and leave. Please, I am begging you. Tell him to let me go. Penelope stared at the pathetic weeping man on the floor. For years she had believed his cruelty. She had looked in the mirror and seen the clumsy, worthless liability he told her she was. But looking at him now, stripped of his stolen power, she felt something new bloom in her chest. It wasn't pity. It was liberation. Do you accept his apology, Ms. Moore? Dominic asked her, stepping back to give her the floor. Penelope took a deep, steadying breath. She stood up straighter, her shoulders squaring despite the damp, clinging cardigan. No, she said, her voice clear and remarkably steady. I don't. Because an apology born out of fear isn't an apology. It's just self-preservation. A ghost of a proud smile touched Dominic's lips. Harrison's head snapped up, desperation, twisting his features. Penelope, please. You signed an ironclad, non-compete clause, drawn up by Kirkland and Ellis. You can't work for anyone else in Chicago. If you walk out that door, you're legally barred from architecture for 3 years. Dominic laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound that chilled the room. I golf with the senior partners at Kirkland and Ellis Harrison. By 5 o'clock today, that non-compete will be shredded, and they will be auditing every single contract your firm has ever touched. Dominic looked back at the room. The Russo Syndicate is pulling its casino bid. Furthermore, if I find out any supplier, contractor, or developer in this city does business with Caldwell Design Group, from this day forward, they will answer to me. He had just effectively blacklisted the entire firm. Harrison collapsed forward, weeping into his hands, his career and his legacy utterly destroyed in less than 5 minutes. Dominic gently placed a hand on the small of Penelope's back. Even through her wet clothes, the heat of his touch was electric. Grab your things, Penelope. We have business to discuss. Penelope didn't pack a box. She simply walked over to her desk, logged out of her computer, picked up her ruined leather portfolio, and grabbed her framed photograph of her mother. She didn't look at Chloe. She didn't look back at Harrison, who was still sobbing on the floor. She walked toward the VIP elevator, Dominic Russo, matching her stride, his hand hovering just behind her back like a protective shield. Matteo followed, leaving the terrified office in stunned silence. The moment the heavy silver elevator doors closed, cutting them off from the world, the adrenaline that had been holding Penelope upright suddenly evaporated. Her knees buckled her portfolio, slipping from her trembling fingers. Before she could hit the floor, Dominic caught her. His strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He didn't struggle with her weight. He held her easily, solidly, lowering her gently until she could lean against the brass railing of the elevator car. I've got you, Dominic murmured, his voice entirely different from the lethal tone he had used with Harrison. It was deep, soothing, and incredibly warm. You're safe. Just breathe. Penelope leaned against the cool metal, burying her face in her hands. I can't believe that just happened. I don't have a job. The medical bills. My mother is at Mount Sinai Hospital for a specialized cardiac treatment, and I just lost my only source of income. Dominic stepped back, shrugging off his wet dress shirt. Underneath, he wore a plain, perfectly fitted black t-shirt that clung to his broad chest. He picked up his dry, heavy wool overcoat from where Matteo had draped it over the railing earlier, and gently wrapped it around Penelope's shivering shoulders. It smelled like expensive cedar and rain, and it engulfed her completely. "You didn't lose a job, Penelope," Dominic corrected, gently crouching down slightly to catch her eye. "You dropped a parasite. As for Mount Sinai, the hospital director is my godfather. Your mother's bills will be erased by the time we reach the ground floor. Matteo, make the call." "On it, boss," Matteo grunted, already dialing his cell phone. Penelope stared at Dominic, her mouth dropping open in shock. You can't do that. I can't accept that. You don't even know me. I spilled coffee all over you. You showed me a $70 million design that was going to revolutionize the South Side skyline." Dominic countered, his dark eyes, intense and unblinking. "And you did it on the back of a napkin while working for a tyrant who treated you like dirt. You are brilliant, Penelope." Penelope looked away, her cheeks burning furiously. I'm fat and clumsy. I'm a mess." Dominic reached out his warm fingers, catching her chin, forcing her to look back at him. "You are beautiful. You take up space in a world that wants women to be small and silent. Never apologize for your presence again." The elevator dinged, opening into the private underground parking garage. A sleek black Maybach was waiting, engine purring. "Where are we going?" Penelope asked hesitantly, as Matteo opened the rear passenger door for her. "We are going to my private suite at the Langham," Dominic said, smoothly, guiding her toward the car. "You are going to take a hot shower order, whatever you want from room service, and put on dry clothes. And then we are going to sit down and discuss the future of Moore and Associates." Penelope froze one foot in the car. Moore and Associates. Dominic offered a rare, genuine smile. "My syndicate requires an exclusive in-house architectural firm. I need someone who understands structural integrity. Someone who can design a casino that looks like Jingang built it, but holds secrets like a fortress. I provide the capital, the office space, and the clients. You provide the genius. You will own 51% of the company. You will be your own boss." Penelope's mind spun. "Why are you doing this for me?" Dominic's expression sobered. He looked out into the dimly lit garage shadows, playing across his sharp jawline. "When I was young, my family was pushed out of our neighborhood by men in expensive suits who thought they could take whatever they wanted because we didn't have the power to stop them. I made a vow that I would never let an arrogant bully win again. I see a lot of myself in you, Penelope. But more importantly, I see an empire in those blueprints." He looked back at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers, sending a shiver down her spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the cold rain. "So," Dominic whispered, extending his hand. "Do we have a deal, Ms. Moore?" Penelope looked at his large, scarred hand. She looked back at the elevator that led to her miserable, invisible past. Then she took a deep breath, wrapped Dominic's heavy coat tighter around her curves, and placed her hand firmly in his. "We have a deal, Mr. Russo." 6 months later, the Chicago skyline was already changing, and Penelope Moore was the woman holding the pen. Her new office, a sprawling corner suite on the 70th floor of the Aon Center, was everything Caldwell Design Group wasn't. It was flooded with natural light, accented with warm mahogany, and entirely hers. The gold leaf lettering on the frosted glass doors read, "Moore and Associates, a firm fully backed by the limitless capital of the Russo Syndicate." Penelope herself was unrecognizable from the hunched, trembling woman who had spilled coffee in a rainstorm. She had stopped trying to hide her body under oversized, miserable cardigans. Dominic had introduced her to a private tailor on Oak Street who specialized in custom couture. Today she wore a deep emerald green wrap dress that hugged every curve, accentuating her full hips and the soft, beautiful lines of her silhouette. Her hair was styled in thick, confident waves. She took up space, and she did it with absolute authority. And why shouldn't she? Her mother, recovering beautifully from surgery, under the care of Dr. Samuel Rosenberg at Mount Sinai, was finally healthy. The medical debt was gone, wiped out with a single phone call. Her architectural firm had poached the top talent in the city, offering double the salaries and a toxic-free environment. But the biggest change was the man who currently sat on the edge of her mahogany desk, casually twirling a silver pen between his fingers. Dominic Russo was a terrifying spectre to the criminal underworld, but to Penelope he was a revelation. Over the past 6 months, their professional partnership had evolved into an intense, all-consuming romance. He didn't just respect her mind. He worshipped her body. He took her to private candlelit dinners at Bavette's Bar and Boeuf, where he would hold her hand across the table and listen to her talk about load-bearing vectors for hours. He made her feel like a goddess forged in marble and steel. "You're staring, Miss Moore," Dominic murmured, a slow, devastating smirk spreading across his face. Penelope felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She stepped closer, resting her hands on his broad chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart through his tailored suit. "I was just thinking about the fact that the casino's structural steel goes up tomorrow, the Russo Grand. It's actually happening." Dominic wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, kissing the soft skin just below her jaw. "It's happening because of you. The City Planning Commission approved the glass atrium without a single revision. You're a genius, Emia Regina." "I have to go down to the site tonight," Penelope said, her breath hitching slightly as his lips trailed up to her ear. "The contractors poured the foundation for the East Wing columns yesterday. I want to personally inspect the concrete curing process before they load the steel tomorrow morning. If there's a microfracture in the base, the entire cantilevered roof could fail." Dominic pulled back his dark brows, furrowing slightly. The protective lethal mafia boss instantly replaced the tender lover. "It's going to be dark, and it's supposed to snow. I'll have Matteo and a security detail go with you." "Dominic, it's a construction site, not a war zone." Penelope laughed softly, running her fingers through his thick, dark hair. "I'm the lead architect. I need to be able to walk my own site without an armed escort. Besides, Matteo is busy auditing the shipping manifests for the imported Italian marble. I'll just be in and out. 1 hour, I promise." Dominic stared into her eyes, clearly fighting every instinct he had to lock her in a gilded tower. Finally he sighed, pressing a hard, possessive kiss to her lips. 1 hour. If you aren't back at my penthouse by 8 o'clock, I am coming down there, and I will be in a very foul mood." "Understood, boss," she whispered, her heart fluttering. By 6:30 p.m., the sun had completely set, and a bitter, biting Chicago wind was whipping off Lake Michigan. The construction site for the Russo Grand sat on a massive plot of prime real estate near the old Navy Pier district. It was a sprawling skeleton of rebar concrete trenches and towering yellow cranes. The crew had gone home for the night, leaving the site eerily silent, save for the howl of the wind and the rattling of heavy plastic tarps. Penelope, wearing a bright white hard hat and a heavy fur-lined trench coat, clicked on her industrial flashlight. She carefully navigated the wooden planks laid over the muddy ground, heading toward the East Wing foundation. She loved the smell of wet concrete and cold steel. It smelled like progress, like power. She knelt beside the massive reinforced concrete pillar base, running a gloved hand over the surface, checking the moisture sensors she had installed. Perfect. The curing was optimal. The steel could be dropped tomorrow. It's a beautiful design, Penelope. Truly, your finest work. The voice echoed from the shadows of the scaffolding, cutting through the howling wind like a rusted blade. Penelope froze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She slowly stood up, swinging the beam of her flashlight toward the darkness. Stepping out from behind a stack of steel I-beams was Harrison Caldwell. But he didn't look like the polished, arrogant CEO he once was. He looked completely unhinged. His designer clothes were filthy and rumpled. He had a ragged beard, dark, hollow circles under his eyes, and he reeked of cheap whiskey. In his right hand, he held a heavy 3-foot steel crowbar. "Harrison!" Penelope breathed, taking a cautious step backward, her boots slipping slightly in the freezing mud. "I lost everything." Harrison spat, his voice trembling with a terrifying mix of sorrow and violent rage. "My firm went bankrupt in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Penelope. My wife took the penthouse at the Waldorf. She took the cars, the bank accounts. Every architectural board in the country blacklisted me. I'm ruined, and it's all your fault." "It's your own fault, Harrison," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She discreetly slid her hand into her coat pocket, her fingers brushing the cold glass of her phone. "You stole from me. You abused me. You built a house of cards and it finally collapsed. I gave you a job when no one else would look twice at a fat, pathetic amateur." Harrison screamed, slamming the crowbar against a metal drum. The deafening clang made Penelope flinch. "I made you, and you destroyed my life for a mob boss." He took a step forward, his eyes wild, the crowbar raised. "If I can't build anymore, neither can you. I'm going to smash every load-bearing sensor on this site. I'm going to compromise the foundation. And then, Penelope, I'm going to compromise you." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Penelope's veins. Harrison wasn't just here to gloat. He was here to cause a catastrophic structural failure, and he was perfectly willing to kill her to do it. But as Harrison lunged forward, swinging the heavy steel bar toward her head, Penelope didn't cower. The timid, invisible woman who used to cry in the break room was dead. She was Penelope Moore, partner to the most powerful man in Chicago, and she knew this construction site better than she knew her own reflection. She threw her heavy body weight to the side, rolling under the scaffolding. The crowbar smashed into the concrete pillar where her head had just been sending sparks and chips of stone flying into the freezing air. "Come back here, you fat cow!" Harrison roared, stumbling blindly into the darkness after her. Penelope scrambled to her feet, her breathing ragged. Think, Penelope, think. The site was a maze, but she had drawn the map. She knew that just 20 yards to the north was the trench for the underground parking structure, a sheer 20-foot drop into a grid of exposed rebar. She pulled her phone from her pocket and blindly pressed the side button, 5 times the emergency SOS feature Dominic had insisted on programming. It would send a silent, immediate GPS ping directly to Matteo and Dominic. She didn't run away. She ran deeper into the site, moving toward the trench. "You can't hide from me." Harrison yelled, his footsteps splashing heavily through the mud. He was swinging the crowbar wildly, smashing wooden support beams and shattering construction lights, plunging them deeper into the shadows. "I'm not hiding, Harrison," Penelope yelled back, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. She positioned herself at the very edge of the parking trench, the 20-foot drop yawning behind her. She grabbed a massive industrial floodlight stand and aimed it directly at the path Harrison was stumbling down. Harrison rounded the corner, gasping for breath, raising the crowbar. Penelope hit the power switch. 10,000 lumens of blinding white light exploded into Harrison's face. he shrieked, throwing his hands over his eyes, entirely blinded. Using every ounce of her strength and the momentum of her heavy frame, Penelope charged forward. She didn't shrink away from her size. She weaponized it. She slammed her shoulder directly into Harrison's chest with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked the breath out of his lungs. Harrison flew backward, dropping the crowbar. He hit the slick mud, sliding uncontrollably until his legs dangled precariously over the edge of the 20-foot trench. He screamed frantically, clawing at the muddy ledge, his lower half dangling over the deadly spike pit of exposed rebar below. Penelope stood over him, breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She looked down at the man who had tormented her for years, watching him sob and beg as he clung to the edge of the abyss. Suddenly, the roar of a high-powered engine shattered the night. Tires screeched against the pavement just outside the fencing. Within seconds, the area was flooded with men in dark coats. Matteo appeared first, a suppressed handgun, drawn and leveled at Harrison's head. But it was the man who walked up behind Matteo that made the very air temperature drop. Dominic Russo stepped into the harsh glare of the floodlights. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated murder. He didn't wear a coat. He was in his suit vest, the sleeves rolled up, his dark eyes fixed on Harrison with the promise of unimaginable violence. "Dominic!" Penelope gasped, her adrenaline finally crashing. Dominic's eyes flicked to her, scanning her rapidly for injuries. Seeing that she was unharmed, he let out a jagged exhale. He walked slowly toward the edge of the trench, standing right beside Penelope. He looked down at Harrison, who was sobbing uncontrollably, his fingers slipping in the freezing mud. "Pull me up!" Harrison screamed, tears streaking through the dirt on his face. "Please, Mr. Russo, I beg you, pull me up." Dominic tilted his head, his voice deathly quiet. "You came after what is mine, Caldwell. You tried to touch my queen. Out of respect for the woman standing next to me, I won't drop you into this trench." Harrison let out a sob of relief. Dominic leaned down, his eyes hollow and soulless. "But you are going to federal prison. Matteo has already delivered the evidence of your corporate embezzlement to the district attorney. You will be housed at Pontiac Correctional. And I want you to know, Harrison, that I own the guards there. I own the inmates. For the rest of your miserable life, you will sleep with one eye open, wondering if today is the day I give the order." Dominic gestured to Matteo. "Pull him up. Break both his legs. Hand him to the police." Matteo hauled Harrison up by his collar, dragging the weeping, broken man away into the darkness. The moment they were alone, the terrifying Mafia boss vanished entirely. Dominic dropped to his knees in the mud, right in front of Penelope. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face into her stomach, holding her so tightly she could feel him shaking. "I thought I was too late," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "I thought I lost you." Penelope sank to her knees in the mud right in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "You didn't lose me. I handled it, Dominic. Because I'm not a victim anymore. You taught me that." Dominic looked at her, his dark eyes shining with tears and overwhelming awe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't even care that they were kneeling in the freezing mud of a construction site. "I didn't plan to do this here," Dominic said, a breathless laugh escaping his lips as he opened the box. Inside rested a diamond ring that was as breathtaking and structurally flawless as the buildings she designed. "But I am not waiting another second. Penelope Moore, you are my empire. You are the foundation of my entire life. Will you marry me?" Penelope looked at the man who had looked past her weight, past her insecurities, and saw a queen. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with every ounce of passion in her soul. "Yes," she cried against his lips. "Yes, I will." 2 years later, the Russo Grand Casino opened to the public, hailed as an architectural masterpiece. Harrison Caldwell remained locked in a windowless cell, terrified of the shadows. And Penelope Russo, the invisible girl who was once told she was nothing, stood at the top of the Chicago skyline, a brilliant architect, a beloved wife, and the undisputed queen of the underworld, ruling her empire from the very top. True power isn't about fitting into a mold, it's about breaking the mold entirely and building your own empire. Penelope proved that the people who try to make you feel small are usually just terrified of how incredibly powerful you truly are. Never let an arrogant bully dim your brilliance, because one day you might just spill coffee on a mafia boss who treats you like the royalty you are. If this story of sweet, brutal vengeance and unexpected romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs an empowering story today, and subscribe for more intense, real-life drama audiobooks. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Harrison at the construction site? See you in the next one.